Now, the series Masters of the Air, which is now playing on Apple TV, does a very good job of portraying the life of air crews in a heavy bomber squadron during World War II. Now, the 100th Bomb Group is the focal point of the series. It was called the Bloody 100th, and it earned its nickname by reputation. There can be no doubt. There was, however, another air force that also targeted Germany, as well as Eastern Europe and southern France and Italy. It was the 15th Air Force. The air war in Europe was fought by the 15th Air Force as well as the 8th Air Force, the 9th Air Force, and the 12th Air Force in the Mediterranean. Together, they made up the United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, or the USSTAF. Now, unlike the 8th Air Force, which had bases set up in East Anglia, England, with a more comfortable existence, now that is a relative term though, as compared to the 15th, which set up shop in Foggia, Italy. The aviation historian Bart Tillman wrote of the issues facing the men in Foggia. The Army Air Force's industrious aviation engineers struggled against rain, mud, and shortages of heavy equipment to bring Foggia and other bases up to the fighting trim it needed to be. The 15th Air Force has been referred to as the Forgotten Air Force. In the 15th Air Force, crews were required to fly 50 missions from the get-go, while the crews in the 8th were sent home after 25 missions. General Doolittle did raise the mission count for the 8th to 30 by mid-1940. Now, the scene in Masters of the Air depicts Robert Rosenthal and his crew being the only plane left in his squadron after one pass of enemy fighters. It was his third mission. This was not an unusual occurrence during the air war in Europe. In the 15th Air Force, the 376 Bomb Group went on a mission December 28th to Vicenza, Italy. On this mission, every plane in the 512 Squadron was shot down. That was 100 men killed or captured on one mission. Robert P. Mellinger of the 376 Bomb Group stated in his oral history, "We got there on the 6th of January, 1944, and it was raining, it was muddy, it was a nasty looking place. We were assigned to the 512th. We go over there. There were no crews, there were no planes, there were empty tents. The replacements asked, 'Where is everybody?' The ground crew responded, 'We don't have anybody. They were all shot down December 28th. Mellinger then asked the $64,000 question, "What is the average life of a crew member?" The response was not encouraging. "Well, maybe a month if you're lucky." John W. Oliver Jr.'s oral history explained the operating area of the 15th. The operating area went from Marseille and Nice over to Munich, Augsburg, Steyr, Regensburg, Wiener Neustadt, Bratislava, and then down to Bucharest, Zagreb, and further down to the Ploesti oil fields in Bucharest. One veteran of the 376 Bomb Group said of the 8th Air Force, "They got all the publicity. We called them the Hollywood Air Force." Now, their missions were the same, the destruction of the Nazi war machine. It was only the location that was different. At their base in San Pancrazio, Italy, the men were living in tents and living off of sea rations. In 1944, the bomb group was composed of 4 squadrons. Each squadron had 12 planes. That made a total of 48 planes plus spares, theoretically. Now, on July 3rd, 1944, the 376 bombed the oil refinery at Giurgiu, Romania, with a 30-ship formation. Now, the day for the crew would begin around 4 a.m. Air crews were notified rather rudely with a wake-up call from an enlisted man entering the room and announcing with some vulgarity to get up. Now, the officers went through the same routine, but without the vulgarity. Now, breakfast would be served in a mess tent, whatever delicacy sea rations could offer. Now, after breakfast, there would be a briefing of the target with the route going in and coming out, the timing for getting into formation, and the time for the IP. That's called the initial point or the beginning of the bomb run. The time on target, checkpoints along the way. Now, it was here that the crews were briefed on escape and evasion routes out of the area. Now, after the main briefing, pilots, navigators, and bombardiers would break into their individual briefing groups. Now, at this point, the enlisted crews would begin dressing out for their long, cold flight to the target. The officers would do the same after their briefing. Now, any of you who grew up watching the show 12 O'Clock High, you would see these guys, just go out to the plane, get in there. They'd be wearing sheepskin coats and nothing else. They didn't show the flak vests and helmets that these guys had to wear. They didn't talk about at 40 plus degrees below zero how if bare skin touched the metal, it would instantly freeze. Air crews needed the protection of electrically heated flying suits. The men called them bunny suits. Now, over the bunny suits, they wore their regular GI clothes. On top of that, they would wear heavy sheepskin-lined flying clothes and boots. It is surprising that the men could walk at all, never mind working in such tight confines as a bomber. Once the crews were assembled at their individual planes, they would perform a final check. Gunners would check their ammunition loads. Radio men would check their radio equipment. The flight engineer and assistant flight engineer would go over the planes with the crew chief. The pilots performed a walk around and then into the cockpit for the pre-flight checklist. All of this was down to the second. It was timed right down to the second. Now, on bombing missions, everything was synchronized down to the time to start engines, takeoff intervals, forming into formation, locations of each division in a formation, and each group in each squadron. This took planning and time. Now, depending on the size of the raid, it could take upwards of 2 hours or more. Now, the July 3rd, 1944 raid on Giurgiu, Romania was only a 30-ship formation. By 8th Air Force standards at that time, it was a small formation. But what people need to understand is that the guys in the 15th flew to multiple targets throughout Eastern and Southern Europe. Now, the 15th had 5 combat wings. Each wing had 4 to 5 combat groups. Each group had 4 squadrons. Each squadron could put up 9 to 12 planes. Now, the Giurgiu mission was assigned to the 736 group. Getting into formation on that day was pretty quick, only about 30 minutes or so. The group would form up into combat boxes. Each box was comprised of 9 to 12 planes. The planes organized into flights A, B, C, and D. Now, the combat box was designed to give maximum firepower and overlapping coverage for the group against Nazi fighter opposition. The lead element in each box was a 3-plane formation. Then stepping up to the right and back a little was the 3-plane high element. Stepping down to the left and back was the low element. And if there was a fourth, that would be tail end Charlie. Not in enviable position. They would get picked off quick. Once the formation was in place, they headed for the target. Their route out was up the coast to Bari, Italy, then across the Adriatic Sea. The group crossed the Yugoslavian coast just north of Lake Shkodra. They were 2 hours from Giurgiu. Now, at this point, the gunners were on their toes, searching for fighters. The formation was still climbing when at 8,000 feet they encountered flak over Bor, Yugoslavia. They were about an hour from Giurgiu at this point. The lead navigator was off course and had led the group over the flak battery surrounding Bor. Now, a half hour from the target, the fighters attacked. First Lieutenant Alex C. Stashon's plane in A flight, second position, was hit with flak in the nose, wounding the nose gunner William E. Bourdin in the knee and disabling his turret. Stashon's plane had lost about half their power and the hydraulic system was shot out, but was able to stay in formation. Now, First Lieutenant Maurice Johnson's plane was hit by flak as well. He wrote, "The flak hit the nose and destroyed flight instruments, hydraulic wiring, nose turret, controls, waist wing, and the tail had holes." He also was able to stay in formation. They were lucky, yet they pressed on. Now, the group reached the target area with 23 ships at that point. All hell broke loose. Carl B. Yaren stated, "We were attacked over the target by 35 to 40 Me-109s and Focke-Wulf 190. The enemy had come in out of the sun, head on to the bomber formation. The first 2 planes to go down were Captain Arthur Stavely and Captain Spada, about 40 miles north of the target. It was 11:50. When Captain Stavely's plane, the nose gunner Steve Kiss, called out, "Fighters coming in at 12 o'clock," he was unable to finish his warning. That first pass of the fighters killed him. That same pass also killed Lieutenant Harold L. Busman, the navigator. The plane burst into flames. It turned about 30 degrees, dropped a wing, and then went into a spiral. The men were scrambling to get out of the plane. Ball turret gunner John Ziegenfuss, waist gunner Daniel Foster, and Matt Shue made their way to the camera hatch, pulling and pushing each other. It was with greatest difficulty that these three men made it out of the plane. The bombardier, Myron Dare, who miraculously survived the head-on pass, pulled the wire to release the nose hatch and jumped. He had been burned about the face and eyes. The co-pilot, Walter Binavanger, went out of the bomb bay. As Captain Stavely left the pilot's seat, Sergeant Thomas Tager handed him his parachute. Tager was last seen looking for his own chute. He never made it out. Now, the reason why these men did not wear their parachutes was simple. They had no room. With all the high-altitude flight gear and the cramped spaces of a bomber, parachutes had to be stowed as close to each position as possible. Sergeant John Turcos, the tail gunner, was last seen by Ziegenfuss, Shue, and Foster half hanging out of the tail turret. He was either dead or the pressure from the spin pinned him. Turcos' chute would have been stowed outside of the tail turret in the rear of the plane. He just didn't have a chance to get out. Now, at the same time, Second Lieutenant James Sparta's plane was also fatally hit. Staff Sergeant Fred Holliday witnessed the event from his plane. I saw an enemy aircraft hit aircraft number 4228960 just before the target. Fire was coming out of the top of the bomb bay. The ship turned off to the right of the formation, going down at a 45-degree angle. I saw one chute open. Did not see aircraft crash. Now, inside Lieutenant Sparta's plane, the nightmare unfolded. Sparta and his co-pilot, Howard Wilkins, if they were still alive, pulling desperately on the yoke, working to stop the deadly dive. Crew members desperately trying to get out of the stricken plane. Only 3 men survived the crash. Gunner Staff Sergeant George Morrison, Sergeant J. Morgan, and radio operator Staff Sergeant Bill Gambroni. Bill Gambroni described his experience. All of a sudden, 5 or 6 fighters came at us from about 12 o'clock out of the sun. It all happened so fast. We really didn't have any time to react. I had just left the radio compartment for the waist. They shot us up real quick. Number 4 was smoking badly. All of a sudden, the plane was in a dive. I don't have any idea what happened up front. I grabbed my chute, crawled up the floor, pulling myself to the hatch. Morgan had just opened it so he could take pictures at the target, and hadn't even had time to mount the camera in place. I got to the hatch and started pulling myself out when all of a sudden I was sucked out and it was real quiet. I finished hooking on my chute. Now remember, he's doing this in midair, and pulled the ripcord. I don't know if anybody else was out until I hit the ground. I was captured immediately. George Morrison was there and he had broken his ankle. Morgan was okay. They took me over to the crash site a while later. The plane didn't burn when it hit. The others were all laid out in a row. I really couldn't look. I didn't have any shoes on, so I did take someone's. Thought, I'm not sure who, as I couldn't recognize them, but I figured he wouldn't mind as I needed them. It was tough to figure these were my buddies only a little while ago. Anyways, they took us to a PW camp from there. They were a great bunch of guys, and we all got along pretty well together. Now, the third plane to go down on this mission was Lieutenant Holgate's. Tech Sergeant Frank Lazito, while at his waist gun from another plane, noticed that Lieutenant Holgate's plane was in trouble. The plane had one engine feathered and was dropping out of formation. First Lieutenant Charles Barnes, the bombardier on board Lieutenant Giurgiu's plane, stated, Holgate's crew flying our left wing went down a short time before we did. They went down in flames, but saw all their crew in Bucharest. They were burned and shot up pretty bad. The fourth plane to go down that day was First Lieutenant August Duggie. Sergeant Guy Fitzgerald, the waist gunner on plane number 36, reported, the flak started coming. I heard several bursts close by and saw one shell burst only a few feet away from Duggie's plane. He dropped his bomb load and then called in and said he lost his supercharger. He flew in position for a few minutes, then dropped back to our left. At about 7 o'clock low, a Me-109 made a pass at us, then at him, all in the same attack. Just after the 109 went by Giurgiu's plane, it lurched, stalled, and immediately went into a spin. Now, the very last plane to go down that day was Lieutenant Hillman's. First Lieutenant Edmund Clendenin reported seeing Hillman's plane just after bombs away. There were several bursts of flak under the plane. The plane peeled off to the left of the formation. The plane dropped down, but then it started climbing as if to go back into formation. That's the last time I saw the plane, but it looked like the pilot had it under control. First Lieutenant Gilbert Mullaney witnessed the ordeal of Hillman's plane. As the formation turned onto the IP and leveled off on course, there seemed to be 3 explosions. The ship bounced around for a bit, then leveled off for a few seconds before slipping off on its right wing. I saw 3 or 4 chutes floating down in that general vicinity. Inside Hillman's plane, things were happening fast. The 3 flak strikes hit the number 3 engine and lit the wing on fire. Hillman rang the bailout bell. Now, in his report, Hillman stated that at approximately 12:30, the crew bailed out. Hillman, co-pilot Robert Harper, navigator Louis Schneider, bombardier Richard Rohel, engineer William Fassler, radio operator George Rogers bailed out of the forward bomb bay. All the gunners were able to leave through the main entrance. The whole crew was lucky. They were able to get out of the plane within 3 minutes. On July 3rd, 1944, in all theaters of operations, 17 planes were shot down. In other words, this was just another normal day for the Army Air Force. Some young men lived and some died. It all depended on fate. Now, on this day, 40 young men of the 376 bomb group went down in flames. 11 men had died. 11 families had lost a son, husband, brother, forever changing their lives. Now, the men who bailed out and survived were immediately captured and sent to POW camps. Unlike in Masters of the Air, these men were lucky. Why lucky, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. You see, all of these men were captured and interned as POWs by the Romanians, not the Germans. 2 months after the July 3rd mission, the Romanians and the Bulgarians switched sides. They joined the Allies. These men were repatriated to the United States during Operation Reunion. Now, that is a story for another day. So why did I pick this particular day? Well, you see, Captain Arthur Stavely was my uncle. He told me a story when I was a little boy about being captured and sent to a POW camp in Romania. He even told me how the Romanians gave him back his .45 automatic when they switched sides. Well, ever since then, I've been fascinated by the air war in Europe and World War II in general, which led to studying history and getting my degree in it. Well, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, hit the like button. Please subscribe to my channel so you find more interesting stories of American history. But most importantly, leave a comment below. This way the algorithm will suggest my videos to more people. Oh, also smash that like button, as they say. Thank you for watching.